May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be now and ever acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you'll wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They don't sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Now, I don't think that this was Jesus doing a Bob Marley and the Wailers on it. Don't worry about a thing, every little thing's gonna be all right. No, he never said that in any other place. So I don't think that's what this is saying. But what I want to do is to link this to a much earlier incident in the kingdom of Flippity Flip. You see, I think the kingdom of Flippity Flip started actually when Mary got pregnant, because that already flipped things round. And the birth of Jesus definitely flipped things round, because he was a king born in a stable. But I want to come forward about 30 years from there to the time when Jesus was led into the wilderness by the Spirit. That time he spent deciding how he was going to set about the ministry. And I want to link two of his temptations with these verses and see if that actually gives us perhaps a slightly different insight into what's being said. You remember the story. Jesus had gone out into the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights, and by that time he was hungry. Well, you would be. And the devil came and said, if you're the Son of God, why not turn these stones into bread and you won't be hungry anymore? But I think actually this was a wider challenge than that. We have the next slide, please. When the devil said to Jesus, why don't you turn these stones into bread? Behind that message, behind that challenge, was another wider challenge. Why don't you give the people what they want? Because if you give them what they want, they'll be there. Appeal to their appetite for things. Give them stuff, and they'll follow you anywhere. Jesus replied by saying, man shall not live by bread alone. But we do live in an age when we are encouraged to indulge our appetites. If you want it, take it. And if somebody else has got more than you, well, try a bit harder and you could have more than them. The kingdom of Flippity Flip says, God's not going to judge you by what you have, but the world may well. I think I told you before about a young man I met in the course of some work I was doing, who told me that he spends £40 on a pair of designer underwear. And when I looked a little bit surprised at that, I didn't even know that you could get underwear that cost £40 a time, to be frank. He said, well, it makes me happy. And then he paused and said, for a little while. And that's the trouble with possessions. Whatever people have, there's always more to be got, isn't there? You've got a nice car, but there's a bigger, better one that would make your life better. You've got nice clothes, but they're last year's. Good heavens. I'm not sure that actually affects any of us here, but I don't know. The trouble with possessions, said Jesus later on, is that they are transitory. Moth and rust corrupt, and thieves break in and steal. And anyway, as he pointed out in the parable of the farmer who built bigger and better barns, you can't take it with you when you go. In this verse, Jesus is saying, don't put your priority in things that you have. Don't make that the focus of your attention. Instead, like Paul later on, who said that he was content whether he was poor or rich. He was content whether he was ill or well. He was content whether he felt strong or weak, because all that he needed could be found in Jesus. And then Jesus goes on to say, don't worry about what you're going to wear. You remember there was a temptation. In some versions it's the second, and in some versions it's the third temptation, where the devil takes him up onto the high point of the temple and he says, throw yourself off. Show everybody just how powerful God is when the angels come and they gently lower you to the ground so that you're not hurt. Jesus said, don't tempt the Lord your God. And this is actually a wider one. It's about image. It's about how we appear to other people. And in some ways, it is important. There are some things that we need to be if we're going to be effective, but there are some things that it's not important to be. When I was getting dressed for church this morning, I did not put on my paint-stained clothes and my oldest jumper. Not because I think it's important that I don't wear those outside, but because growing up, that kind of respect coming to church was something that was instilled in me. And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as I'm not coming here thinking, oh, she could have put something better than that on this morning. Does she really want to come to church looking like that? What I choose to do is up to me. It's not up to me to judge what anybody else does. But there are other ways that we do try and mask who we are to seem something different. And Jesus says, no. Because how other people see you isn't the defining factor. How God sees you is the defining factor. And when he looks at you, what does he see? He sees a precious child, beloved and loved and cherished and wanted. You can't pretend with God, because he can see all that you are. He can see your insecurities. He can see your doubts. He can see your anger. He can see your hurt. And he loves you anyway. We do have to be genuine in what we do. Not for the sake of appearances, but because if we're not genuine in everything we do, we have no right to speak the truth into other people's lives. If we are not the bearers of truth in everything we do, if we don't have integrity in all our dealings, then how can we claim the truth of Jesus and speak it into someone else's life? Our appearance, how we portray ourselves, is important, but it's important because it mustn't be a mask. It must be what we truly are. Not doing things so that other people will say, wow, isn't she good? But so they'll say, wow, what a God of love she must serve to be able to do the things she does. The world is all about appearances. Even people who are beautiful airbrush their pictures to get rid of anything they might perceive as an imperfection. We can't afford to do that. We need to be who we say we are. That commandment about not taking the name of the Lord your God in vain, I don't think primarily refers to using God's name as a swear word, although I think that's wrong, and I wouldn't do it. But for some people, it isn't the name of God anyway, beside the point. If I say I am a Christian, if I say I am a little Christ, I can't have that name unless my actual actions, my thoughts, my words, the way I treat people is Christ-like. That, for me, is the crux of taking the name of the Lord in vain. So, in Philippians, Paul says this, don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. If we know who we are, if we know the relationship we have with Jesus, if we are in line and in tune with what he wants for us, what he wants us to do, where he wants us to be, what he wants us to say, then we'll be here. Because the prayers of our hearts will be in line with the prayer of God's heart. Our worries and concerns, our things that we want to put right, will be in line with the will of God. And we will be able to present our requests to God. I read this in one of my, in part of my readings for this week from Leviticus. It says, I broke the bars off your yoke and made you walk erect. Or as the Message puts it, I ripped off the harness of your slavery so you can walk in freedom. When we are who we say we are, when we know that we're beloved children of God and that he cares about us, then we'll no longer be subject to the anxieties and the worries and the fears. Yes, we will have concerns, of course we will, but they won't take over our lives. Jesus died that we might be free. Jesus came so that that yoke could be taken off us and we take on a harness with him. Not a yoke to bear us down, but the harness that allows us to stand tall, in step with him, and be the people we're chosen to be. And the really great news is this. We are not in this on our own. This verse of Ecclesiastes is often used in marriage services. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. But I want to say that the 3 strands that we have here, right now, right this moment, is you, plural, me, and him. And if we are working together, then him, you, and me, we're invincible. And to his name be all the glory.